The warning came without fanfare or diplomatic courtesy. Commander Vextal of the Zephyrian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth's blue marble spinning slowly in the darkness. Behind him, 700 warships waited in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal that had conquered 43 worlds before this one. "Send the message," Vextal commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of imperial authority. The quantum transmission reached every communication device on Earth simultaneously. President Helen Carter was drinking coffee in the White House when her secure phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was reviewing patrol schedules at Luna Base when every screen in the command center flickered and displayed the same message. "People of Earth, you have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. Your weapons are primitive, your defenses are worthless, and your resistance will only ensure your complete destruction. Submit now, and some of you may live as servants to the Zephyrian Empire. Refuse and your world will burn." The transmission ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Earth's leaders staring at screens that had returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Jake Morrison pushed back from his desk and walked to the observation deck. Through the reinforced glass he could see Earth hanging in space like a jewel, peaceful and unaware that death waited just beyond Mars. The Zephyrian fleet was too far away to see with naked eyes, but long-range sensors painted a clear picture. 700 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. "Sir, urgent message from Earth Command," his communications officer called out. Jake returned to the command center where President Carter's face filled the main screen. Her usual composed expression had cracked, revealing the fear that every human leader now carried. "All military commanders are ordered to report to Earth Command within 6 hours. We need to discuss our response to this threat." The meeting that followed would be remembered as the darkest moment in human history. Earth's top military minds gathered in a secure bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by displays showing the alien fleet's overwhelming superiority. Admiral Rick Harper, a veteran of the Mars Colony Wars, spoke first. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing an enemy with technology centuries ahead of our own. Their smallest frigate carries more firepower than our entire fleet combined. Their shields have never been penetrated in recorded galactic history. We have exactly zero chance of military victory." The room fell silent. General Kate Ellis, commander of Earth's ground forces, leaned forward in her chair. "What about evacuation? Can we get people off-world?" "Impossible," replied Dr. Ryan Blake, Earth's leading xenoarchaeologist. "Even if we had the ships, which we don't, they control the space around Earth. Nothing gets out without their permission." President Carter studied the faces around the table. These were Earth's best and brightest, the people who had led humanity to the stars, and they all wore the same expression of defeat. "So our options are surrender or extinction. Those appear to be the only choices," Admiral Harper confirmed. But Jake Morrison hadn't spoken yet. The young officer had been quiet throughout the briefing, studying the tactical displays with an intensity that made others uncomfortable. "There might be a third option," he said finally. Every head turned toward him. President Carter raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Jake stood and pointed to the display showing the alien fleet's position. "They're confident. Overconfident, maybe. Look at their formation. They're not even bothering to maintain proper screening protocols. They've positioned their command ships at the front, expecting us to either surrender immediately or die quickly." "Your point?" General Ellis asked. "My point is that they don't know us. They've conquered 43 worlds, but those worlds surrendered when faced with superior force. They've never fought an enemy that refused to quit." Dr. Blake frowned. "Lieutenant Commander, we can't fight superior technology with wishful thinking." "No, but we can fight it with time," Jake replied. "If I take a single ship against their fleet, I might be able to delay them long enough for our scientists to find something, anything, that gives us an edge." The suggestion hung in the air like a death sentence. Admiral Harper shook his head. "That's suicide, Morrison. One ship against 700? You'd last maybe 5 minutes? Maybe. But 5 minutes is 5 minutes more than we have if we surrender now." President Carter studied the young officer's face. She saw no false bravado, no desperate heroics. She saw calm determination and something else, something that reminded her of humanity's finest moments. "What ship would you take?" "The UES Defiance. She's fast, maneuverable, and her crew knows how to improvise." "Morrison," Admiral Harper said quietly, Even if you somehow delayed them for an hour, what then? We still can't match their firepower. Jake looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Then we make them pay for every second. We show them that humans don't break easily. Maybe that's worth something. Dr. Blake had been silent during the exchange, but now he cleared his throat. Actually, there might be more to this than we realize. I've been researching some unusual archaeological finds, genetic markers that suggest humans aren't originally from Earth. If I'm right, we might have capabilities we don't even know about. What kind of capabilities? President Carter asked. I'm not sure yet, but the evidence suggests our ancestors were warriors, the kind that entire empires feared. The genetic triggers might still be there, dormant but not dead. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as leaders processed this unexpected information. Finally, President Carter called for order. Dr. Blake, how long would you need to research this theory? At least 72 hours, possibly longer. Which is exactly how much time we don't have, Jake pointed out. Unless someone buys us more time. President Carter looked around the table one final time. Every option led to death or slavery except one. The option that asked everything of one man and his crew. Morrison, if you're volunteering for this mission, I need to know you understand what you're asking. I understand, Madam President. My crew and I are ready to buy Earth whatever time we can. The decision was made with a simple nod. Within 6 hours, the UES Defiance would launch from Luna Base, carrying humanity's desperate hope into the face of certain death. Jake Morrison returned to his ship knowing he might never see Earth again, but also knowing that sometimes the right choice and the impossible choice were exactly the same thing. As the Defiance prepared for launch, Dr. Blake worked frantically in his laboratory, searching ancient texts and genetic sequences for clues about humanity's true nature. Somewhere in the data was an answer, a key that might unlock what humans really were beneath the surface. Time was running out, but humanity's greatest test was just beginning. The UES Defiance moved through space like a silver needle threading through the darkness. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the Zephyrian fleet grow larger on the main screen. 700 ships arranged in perfect formation, each one a monument to alien power and human insignificance. Contact in 30 minutes, reported Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, his tactical officer. Her voice remained steady despite the impossible odds they faced. The crew of the Defiance had volunteered for this mission knowing they would not return home. Any response to our hails? Jake asked. Nothing yet, sir. They're probably wondering why one small ship is approaching their entire fleet. Commander Vextal was indeed wondering exactly that. He stood before his tactical display, studying the lone human vessel's approach vector with growing amusement. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever sent a single ship against his fleet. Most worlds surrendered immediately upon seeing Zephyrian power. The few that resisted usually sent everything they had in a desperate final assault. Sub-Commander Hextar, what is the tactical assessment of this human vessel? His second-in-command consulted his instruments with practiced efficiency. Single frigate class, approximately 200 meters in length. Primitive fusion drive, basic deflector shields, and projectile weapons that cannot penetrate our hull plating. It poses no threat to our forces. Then why send it alone? Vextal mused. What possible purpose could this serve? Perhaps it carries a surrender message from their leaders? Perhaps. Or perhaps these humans are simply mad. Vextal's mandibles clicked in what passed for Zephyrian laughter. Disable their weapons and engines. I want to examine this curiosity intact. The order rippled through the fleet's communication network. 3 heavy cruisers moved to intercept the human ship, their plasma cannons charging with deadly energy. On the Defiance, alarms began sounding as the alien ships locked their weapons onto the small human vessel. 3 cruisers closing fast, Amy reported. They're powering weapons but haven't fired yet. Jake studied the tactical display. Each of those cruisers outmassed his ship by a factor of 50. Their weapons could vaporize the Defiance with a single volley, but they hadn't fired. That meant something. They want us alive, he realized. Signal all stations, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Captain Sam Turner, Earth's most decorated Marine, stood in the ship's armory with his assault team. 20 Marines in full combat armor, each one knowing they might face alien borders at any moment. Listen up, Sam told his men. We don't know what these aliens fight like, but we know how humans fight. We fight for each other, we fight for what's right, and we never give up. Whatever happens out there, we show them what human Marines can do. The first Zephyrian plasma burst missed the Defiance by mere meters, close enough to overload several systems, but not enough to disable the ship. Jake ordered maximum thrust, pushing the small vessel into a spiraling, evasive pattern that his pilot, Lieutenant Danny Walsh, executed with desperate precision. "They're trying to disable us, not destroy us," Amy observed as another plasma burst scorched past the hull. "Good. That gives us an advantage." "What advantage?" "We can't hurt them with our weapons." Jake smiled grimly. "We can hurt them in ways they don't expect." The Defiance dove between two Zephyrian cruisers, forcing them to cease fire to avoid hitting each other. The maneuver bought precious seconds, but it also put the human ship directly in the path of the third cruiser's tractor beam. "We're caught," Danny reported as the ship shuddered under the alien technology's grip. "Boarding parties incoming," Amy announced as Zephyrian assault shuttles launched from the nearest cruiser. Jake activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands, prepare to repel boarders. This is what we came here for. Show them who we are." The Zephyrian Marines who breached the Defiance's hull expected to face a demoralized crew ready to surrender. Instead, they encountered something their military training had never prepared them for. The humans fought with a ferocity that seemed to grow stronger as their situation became more hopeless. Sam Turner's assault team met the alien boarders in the main corridor. The Zephyrians were larger, stronger, and better armed, but they hesitated when faced with enemies who showed no fear of death. Human Marines threw themselves at alien warriors twice their size, using tactics that defied rational military doctrine. Sub-Commander Hextar watched the boarding action through his tactical displays with growing confusion. "Commander Vextal, the human resistance is unexpectedly fierce. Our boarding teams report that the humans refuse to surrender even when surrounded and outnumbered." Vextal studied the combat feeds with interest. He had conquered species that were physically stronger than humans, others that were more technologically advanced, but he had never seen anything like this stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "How many casualties?" 17 of our Marines are down. The humans have lost 12 but continue fighting." This was unprecedented. Zephyrian Marines were bred for combat, trained from birth to be perfect soldiers. The idea that primitive humans could inflict significant casualties on them was disturbing. Meanwhile, Dr. Blake worked frantically in his laboratory on Earth. Ancient Sumerian tablets spread across his desk alongside quantum genetic analyzers and archaeological data from a dozen star systems. The pieces of humanity's hidden past were finally beginning to form a coherent picture. "Computer, cross-reference genetic markers with archaeological site locations in the Rigel sector." The analysis appeared on his screen, and Blake's eyes widened. The genetic signatures matched perfectly with ruins found on 7 different worlds, ruins that showed signs of massive battles fought thousands of years ago. "My God," he whispered. They weren't just warriors. They were the warriors that everyone else feared. Back on the Defiance, the battle for the ship's control continued deck by deck. Sam Turner found himself cornered in the engineering section with 3 of his Marines, facing 8 Zephyrian soldiers. By all military logic, he should surrender to save his men's lives. Instead, he smiled. "Rodriguez, Wilson, Murphy, you boys ready to show these aliens how humans say goodbye?" The 3 Marines grinned back at their captain. They were about to die, but they would die as humans. The explosion that followed destroyed the engineering section and took 12 Zephyrian Marines with it. Sam Turner's final act was to manually overload the ship's fusion reactor, not to destroy the enemy fleet, but to send a message that would echo through every communication channel in the Zephyrian armada. The message was simple. Humans would rather die than yield. Commander Vextal watched the human ship's destruction with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. The primitive vessel had lasted less than an hour against his fleet, but in that hour, it had cost him more casualties than some entire planetary conquests. "Sub-Commander, have you ever seen anything like this before?" "No, Commander. Most species surrender when resistance becomes futile. These humans fought harder as their situation became more hopeless." Vextal stared at the expanding debris field where the Defiance had made its final stand. Somewhere in those twisted pieces of metal lay 26 humans who had chosen death over surrender. It was illogical, irrational, and completely inexplicable. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Vextal felt something he had never experienced before when facing an inferior enemy. He felt uncertain, On Earth, the destruction of the Defiance was viewed with both sorrow and pride. Jake Morrison and his crew had bought humanity exactly 47 minutes. It didn't seem like much, but Dr. Blake was beginning to understand that sometimes 47 minutes of human determination could change everything. The genetic analysis was complete, and the truth about humanity's origins was about to surface. What Blake had discovered would explain why the Defiance had fought so fiercely, and why the Zephyrian Empire should have been very afraid of awakening humanity's true nature. The news of the Defiance's destruction spread through the Zephyrian fleet like wildfire. In the crew quarters of the battleship Dominator, young warriors who had never questioned an order began asking uncomfortable questions. Senior warrior Kextall found himself explaining to his squad why 26 humans had chosen death over the logical choice of surrender. They were clearly insane, he told his warriors, but his voice lacked conviction. Kextall had seen the combat recordings. The humans had fought with purpose, not madness. They had coordinated their resistance, planned their sacrifices, and died with what could only be called honor. Commander Vextal stood alone in his private chambers, studying the tactical reports from the Defiance engagement. His officers had recommended immediate bombardment of Earth to prevent further delays, but something held him back. The human ship had been insignificant, yet its crew's actions had created doubt among his warriors. Doubt was dangerous in military organizations built on absolute certainty. On Earth, Dr. Blake burst into the emergency command center with data tablets clutched in his hands. President Carter looked up from a strategic briefing with her remaining military commanders, hope flickering in her eyes at Blake's obvious excitement. "Madam President, I've found it. I know what we are." The room fell silent as Blake connected his data to the main display. Ancient symbols, genetic sequences, and archaeological photographs filled the screens. Humanity didn't evolve on Earth. We're descendants of a warrior race called the Terrans who ruled half the galaxy 12,000 years ago. They were systematically hunted to extinction by a coalition of 37 alien empires who couldn't defeat them in open warfare. Admiral Harper leaned forward, studying the genetic data. "You're saying we're related to this extinct warrior species?" "More than related. We are them." The survivors who escaped to Earth carried dormant genetic triggers that activate under extreme stress. The Defiance crew experienced the beginning of this awakening. President Carter studied the ancient battle site photographs. Massive craters fused glass and weapon signatures that suggested conflicts spanning entire star systems. What made these Terrans so dangerous that 37 empires had to unite to destroy them? Blake highlighted a series of genetic markers on the display. They never surrendered. Ever. The archaeological record shows battles where Terran forces fought until the last individual. Even when victory was impossible, they had a psychological makeup that treated death as preferable to defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Bennett, Earth's chief strategic analyst, had been monitoring Zephyrian communications from Luna Base. She interrupted the briefing with urgent news. "Madam President, we're intercepting unusual chatter from the alien fleet. Multiple ships are reporting crew morale problems. Some junior officers are requesting permission to withdraw from Earth orbit." This was unprecedented information. The Zephyrian Empire had never experienced morale problems during conquest operations. "What's causing their uncertainty?" President Carter asked. "The Defiance, ma'am. They can't understand why humans would choose death over surrender. It's creating psychological stress among their warriors." Dr. Blake nodded grimly. "The genetic triggers aren't just activating in humans. Our refusal to yield is having an effect on the aliens, too. They've built their empire on the assumption that inferior forces will eventually surrender when resistance becomes futile." Meanwhile, Colonel Marcus Young led Earth's remaining defense fleet in preparation for what everyone expected to be humanity's final battle. 12 frigates and 4 cruisers against 700 alien warships. The mathematics of destruction had never been clearer. But something was happening to the human crews that Marcus couldn't explain. His pilots reported feeling different, more focused, more determined. Combat simulations that should have ended in quick defeat were stretching longer, as human tactical thinking became increasingly creative and unpredictable. Captain Kate Ellis watched her fighter squadrons practice attack runs against impossible odds. The pilots flew with a precision and daring that exceeded their training. When she asked them about it, they gave her the same answer. Losing was simply not an option they could accept. The first sign that something fundamental had changed came when Zephyrian probe ships approached Earth's outer defense perimeter. Standard military doctrine called for human forces to retreat in the face of superior firepower, but Captain Danny Walsh, commanding the frigate Courage, made a different choice. All ships, this is Walsh, they want to fight. Let's give them one they'll remember. The engagement that followed defied every principle of space combat tactics. 12 human ships attacked 40 Zephyrian vessels in a battle that should have lasted minutes, but stretched to nearly an hour. The humans fought with a desperate creativity that confused alien tactical computers. They used debris fields as cover, executed impossible maneuvers, and coordinated attacks that seemed to anticipate Zephyrian responses. When the battle ended, the humans had lost 8 ships, but they had destroyed 12 alien vessels and damaged 15 others. The exchange ratio was still heavily in favor of the Zephyrians, but it was far better than anyone had expected. Commander Vextal received the battle reports with growing unease. His probe force had encountered resistance that exceeded all predictions. The human ships had fought like their crews were personally offended by the suggestion of defeat. Sub-Commander Hextar, I want a full analysis of human combat psychology. Something is happening that our previous intelligence reports didn't predict. Yes, Commander. However, I should mention that several of our junior officers have requested reassignment away from Earth operations. This was alarming news. Zephyrian warriors requesting to avoid combat was unheard of in Imperial military history. On Earth, the genetic awakening was accelerating. Dr. Blake's research team worked around the clock to understand the process, but the changes were happening faster than they could study them. Human soldiers reported enhanced reflexes, improved tactical thinking, and most significantly, an absolute conviction that defeat was unacceptable. President Carter authorized the activation of additional genetic triggers found in the research data. The process was dangerous and unpredictable, but facing extinction left no room for caution. The results were immediate and dramatic. Human fighter pilots began executing maneuvers that their aircraft weren't designed to handle. Ground forces displayed coordination and determination that exceeded their training. Most importantly, every human involved in the defense effort shared the same unshakable belief: they would not be conquered. Captain Sam Turner's sacrifice on the Defiance had become something more than heroism. It had become a symbol of what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond all limits. The story spread through Earth's military forces, carried by survivors who had witnessed humans choosing death over surrender. But the real impact was being felt in the Zephyrian fleet. Warriors who had conquered 43 worlds without hesitation now found themselves reluctant to engage an enemy that seemed to become more dangerous as defeat became more certain. Commander Vextal called a meeting of his senior officers to address the growing morale crisis. The assembled commanders represented 3,000 years of military tradition, but they all wore the same expression of uncertainty. Explain to me how an inferior species is causing psychological problems among our forces, Vextal demanded. The silence that followed was answer enough. None of them had an explanation for an enemy that defied the basic assumptions upon which their empire was built. Deep in his research facility, Dr. Blake made one final discovery that would change everything. Hidden in the genetic code was not just the warrior heritage of humanity's ancestors, but the memory of how they had nearly conquered the galaxy before their extinction. The triggers being activated weren't just making humans better fighters. They were awakening the collective memory of a species that had once made 37 empires tremble with fear. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn why their ancestors had worked so hard to ensure that the Terran warrior race would never rise again. The awakening spread through humanity like electricity through water. Captain Kate Ellis felt it first during a routine patrol around Luna Base. The genetic triggers activated while she reviewed tactical displays, and suddenly she could see patterns in Zephyrian fleet movements that had been invisible moments before. Their formations weren't just militarily sound. They were predictable, following ancient doctrines designed to intimidate rather than adapt. Rodriguez, adjust our patrol pattern. I want to test something. Her wingman, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, followed Kate's lead as they approached a Zephyrian observation post. The alien sensors tracked their movement, but Kate's enhanced tactical awareness let her predict exactly how the enemy would respond. When Zephyrian fighters launched to intercept them, Kate was already moving to exploit their approach vector. The brief engagement lasted only minutes, but it ended with 2 Zephyrian fighters destroyed and the human pilots unharmed. More importantly, it demonstrated that awakened humans could not only match alien technology but exceed it through sheer tactical innovation. Commander Vextal received the report with growing alarm. His observation post commanders described human pilots who seemed to anticipate Zephyrian responses before they happened. The humans flew like they had studied Zephyrian tactics for centuries instead of days. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his tactical staff. "These primitives shouldn't be able to match our combat efficiency." But they were doing more than matching it. They were exceeding it. On Earth, Dr. Blake's laboratory had become the center of humanity's transformation. The genetic activation process was revealing capabilities that even he hadn't expected. Human volunteers emerged from the treatment chambers with enhanced reflexes, improved pattern recognition, and most remarkably, an intuitive understanding of 3-dimensional combat tactics. The Terran genetic memory isn't just about determination, Blake explained to President Carter during an emergency briefing. It includes tactical knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of galactic warfare. We're not just becoming better fighters, we're remembering how to fight. President Carter studied the test results with amazement and growing hope. How many people can undergo this process? In theory, every human carries the genetic markers. But the activation is dangerous. We've lost 12% of the volunteers to neural trauma. And the successful cases? They're becoming something extraordinary. Watch this. Blake showed her footage of Lieutenant Danny Walsh, one of the first successful activations engaging 6 Zephyrian fighters simultaneously. His maneuvers defied both physics and common sense, yet somehow his ship survived while all 6 alien craft were destroyed. The transformation wasn't limited to combat personnel. Dr. Ryan Stevens, a theoretical physicist at MIT, underwent the activation process and immediately began developing new weapons designs based on principles he somehow knew, despite never studying them. Engineer Lisa Chen created shield modifications that doubled defensive capability using techniques that existed nowhere in human databases. But the most significant change was psychological. Every awakened human shared the same absolute conviction. Surrender was not a possibility they could consider. Death was preferable to defeat, and defeat was something that simply would not happen. Colonel Marcus Young led the first major engagement between awakened human forces and the main Zephyrian fleet. 24 human ships against 200 alien vessels, a battle that should have ended in minutes with complete human annihilation. Instead, it became a 4-hour running battle that left the Zephyrian commanders stunned. Human ships appeared and disappeared from sensor range like ghosts, striking with precision that targeted specific systems rather than attempting to destroy entire vessels. They fought not to win a single engagement, but to inflict maximum psychological damage on the enemy. The results were devastating to Zephyrian morale. Warriors who had never experienced fear found themselves reluctant to pursue human forces into asteroid fields where ambush was possible. Ship commanders began requesting backup for routine operations that previously required single vessels. Commander Vextal watched his empire's military superiority crumble in real time. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were fighting smart. Every engagement revealed new tactics, new strategies, new ways of turning technological disadvantage into psychological advantage. Subcommander Hextar, I want a complete analysis of how these humans are achieving impossible combat results. Commander, our scientists believe they are experiencing some form of genetic activation. Their combat capabilities are increasing exponentially, and their tactical thinking has become completely unpredictable. Unpredictable how? They fight like they would rather die than lose. But more than that, they fight like they believe losing is impossible. It's affecting our warriors' confidence. This was the nightmare scenario that Zephyrian military doctrine had never considered, an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more hopeless. The psychological impact spread beyond combat operations. Zephyrian occupation forces on other worlds began reporting increased resistance activity. Species that had been conquered for centuries started questioning whether the Empire was truly invincible. The human example was spreading across the galaxy like a virus. On Earth, The awakening reached a critical threshold when President Carter herself underwent the genetic activation process. The transformation of humanity's political leadership created a fundamental shift in strategic thinking. Earth was no longer fighting for survival. It was fighting for the principle that no species should be forced to surrender its freedom. "Dr. Blake," Carter said after her activation, "I want every human in the solar system to have access to this process. Not just military personnel, but everyone. Madam President, the risks are significant. We could lose millions to neural trauma. Doctor, we're going to lose billions if we fail. The choice is clear." The mass activation began immediately. Across Earth, Luna Base, Mars Colony, and the Outer System settlements, humans lined up to undergo the genetic awakening. The process was dangerous, but the alternative was extinction or slavery. Captain Sam Rodriguez, commanding the defense of Mars Colony, felt the change sweep through his forces like fire. His pilots began flying with a precision that made alien tactical computers malfunction from inability to predict human responses. Ground forces displayed coordination that seemed telepathic in its efficiency, but the real change was in their eyes. Every awakened human carried the same expression, the absolute certainty that they would not be defeated. The Zephyrian fleet began experiencing something unprecedented in Imperial history: desertion. Junior officers requested transfer to other sectors. Warriors who had fought bravely for decades suddenly developed medical conditions that prevented combat duty. Ships that should have been fully staffed operated with skeleton crews as personnel found excuses to avoid Earth operations. Commander Vextal faced a crisis that military training had never prepared him for. His empire's greatest weapon had always been the certainty of victory. Faced with an enemy that refused to accept defeat, that certainty was crumbling. "Sub-Commander, prepare a message to Imperial Command. Request immediate reinforcement of our fleet." "How many additional ships, Commander?" Vextal stared at the tactical display showing human forces that shouldn't exist engaging his fleet with tactics that shouldn't work. "All of them. Request every available ship in the Empire." For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zephyrian commander was asking for help to conquer a single world. The request would send shockwaves through the Imperial hierarchy, but Vextal no longer cared about his career. He cared about survival, because somewhere in the back of his mind a terrible suspicion was growing. These humans weren't just fierce fighters or clever tacticians. They were something his empire had encountered before, something that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization 12,000 years ago. The humans weren't just awakening their genetic potential, they were remembering what they used to be. The final battle began when humanity stopped running and started hunting. Admiral Rick Harper, newly awakened and commanding the entire human defense fleet, made a decision that would have been considered insane just weeks earlier. Instead of defending Earth, he ordered a direct assault on the Zephyrian command fleet. "All ships, this is Harper. We're done playing defense. Time to show these aliens what humans do to bullies." 150 human vessels, many of them civilian ships hastily converted to military use, accelerated towards 700 Zephyrian warships. The numerical disadvantage should have made the outcome obvious, but the awakened humans saw only opportunity where others saw suicide. Captain Kate Ellis led the fighter squadrons in the first wave. Her enhanced awareness let her see the Zephyrian formations not as obstacles, but as targets waiting to be exploited. The alien ships flew in precise patterns that prioritized intimidation over adaptability, exactly the kind of rigid thinking that awakened human tactics were designed to destroy. All fighters, remember what we learned. They fight like they're still conquering primitives. We fight like we're defending the future of free will in the galaxy. The engagement that followed defied every principle of space warfare. Human ships dove through Zephyrian formations like sharks through a school of fish, targeting command vessels and communication nodes with surgical precision. They didn't try to destroy the alien fleet. They tried to break its ability to function as a coordinated force. Commander Vextal watched his tactical displays with growing horror as human forces tore apart formations that had conquered star systems. His ships were individually superior, but humanity fought with a coordination that seemed impossible for their technology level. Sub-Commander Hextar, how are they achieving this level of tactical integration? Unknown, Commander. Their communication systems shouldn't be capable of this kind of coordination, but they're operating like a single organism. The truth was simpler than Hextar realized. The awakened humans weren't just sharing tactical data through their communication systems. They were sharing the collective memory of a warrior species that had once fought as one mind across multiple star systems. The Terran genetic heritage included not just individual combat skills, but species-level tactical awareness. Dr. Blake monitored the battle from Earth while simultaneously coordinating the activation of the planet's remaining population. The process had accelerated beyond all predictions as the genetic triggers responded to the stress of combat. Millions of humans were awakening simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that was transforming the entire species. President Carter, we're seeing activation rates of 97% across all population centers. The neural trauma rate has dropped to less than 2%. It's as if the process becomes safer when more people undergo it simultaneously. Carter, her own awakening complete, understood what Blake was seeing. It's not individual activation anymore, Doctor. We're becoming what we used to be as a species. The Terrans didn't fight as individuals. They fought as humanity itself. The battle in space was revealing the truth of her words. Human pilots executed maneuvers that required split-second coordination across hundreds of ships. They fought not as separate crews, but as extensions of a single strategic mind that operated on a scale the Zephyrians couldn't comprehend. Lieutenant Danny Walsh, piloting a converted cargo hauler against Zephyrian battlecruisers, felt the collective awareness guide his actions. He knew exactly where every other human ship was positioned, what they intended to do, and how his own actions fit into the larger pattern. It wasn't telepathy. It was something deeper. It was the awakening of species-level consciousness. The Zephyrian fleet began to disintegrate under pressure it had never been designed to handle. Alien commanders found their ships isolated from the main fleet by human tactics that seemed to anticipate their every move. Communications networks were disrupted by precisely targeted attacks that shouldn't have been possible with human technology. But the real breakthrough came when Captain Sam Mitchell, commanding the cruiser Liberty, discovered that awakened humans could interface directly with their ship's computers. The genetic activation had enhanced human neural capacity to the point where the boundary between pilot and vessel began to blur. All ships try direct neural interface with your navigation systems. Don't ask me how, just trust the awakening. The results were immediate and stunning. Human ships began moving with a fluidity that made them nearly impossible to target. They flowed through space like living creatures rather than mechanical constructs, anticipating enemy fire and responding to threats before conscious thought was required. Commander Vextel realized he was witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. The human ships were operating beyond the capabilities of their technology, as if the crews had become part of the vessels themselves. Signal Imperial Command immediately. Tell them we're not fighting humans anymore. We're fighting the Terrans. The message that reached Zephyrian Imperial Command sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government. The Terrans were supposed to be extinct, eliminated 12,000 years ago in the greatest military campaign in galactic history. If they had somehow survived and evolved on Earth, the implications were terrifying. The response came within hours. Total mobilization of all Zephyrian military forces for immediate deployment to Earth. The Empire was committing everything to ensure that the Terran threat was eliminated once and for all, but it was already too late. The awakening had reached critical mass not just on Earth but throughout human space. Every human colony, every research station, every exploration vessel was experiencing the same transformation. Humanity was remembering what it meant to be the species that had once made entire galactic civilizations tremble. Admiral Harper felt the collective awareness of his species flow through him as he prepared for the final phase of the battle. The Zephyrian reinforcements were coming, but they would find an enemy that was no longer bound by the limitations of individual thinking. All human forces, this is Harper. We've learned who we really are. Now let's show the galaxy what that means. The battle that followed was less a military engagement than a demonstration of evolutionary superiority. Awakened humans fought with capabilities that transcended their individual limitations, operating as components of a species-level intelligence that had been dormant for 12 millennia. When the Zephyrian reinforcements arrived, they found not the primitive world they expected to conquer, but the resurgent heart of the warrior race that had nearly conquered the galaxy before. The humans didn't just fight back. They fought with the accumulated tactical knowledge of a species that had made warfare into an art form. Commander Vextal faced a choice that no Zephyrian commander had ever confronted. He could continue a battle that would result in the complete destruction of his fleet, or he could do something unprecedented in Imperial history, surrender to an enemy his empire had come to conquer. The decision came when Admiral Harper offered terms that shocked the alien commander. Not just cessation of hostilities, but complete transformation of the Zephyrian Empire from a conquest-based civilization to a democratic federation of free worlds. You have a choice. Commander, Harper's message stated, join us in creating a galaxy where species determine their own destiny, or face the consequences of awakening something that should have remained sleeping. Vextal looked at his tactical displays showing human forces that operated beyond the boundaries of physics and strategy as his empire understood them. He thought of the 37 alien civilizations that had united to destroy the Terrans 12,000 years ago, and realized that those civilizations had failed to complete their task. The Terrans hadn't been destroyed. They had been waiting. Sub-Commander Hextar signaled all Zephyrian forces to stand down and prepare for negotiations. Commander, the Empire will consider this treason. The Empire will consider survival, or it will cease to exist. The formal surrender of the Zephyrian fleet to human forces marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. But the real transformation was just beginning. The human example had spread beyond Earth's solar system, inspiring resistance movements on conquered worlds throughout the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for centuries began to remember what freedom meant. The virus of human determination had become a galactic pandemic, and empires built on conquest found themselves facing enemies who had learned humanity's greatest lesson. Some things are worth dying for, and death is preferable to surrender. Dr. Blake's final report to the newly formed Galactic Council summarized humanity's gift to the galaxy in simple terms. Humans had proven that resolve could triumph over technology, that determination could overcome numerical disadvantage, and that the refusal to accept defeat could transform the impossible into the inevitable. The Terran warrior species had returned to the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Every empire that had built its power on the assumption that inferior forces would eventually surrender learned the same hard lesson. Some species never learned to quit, and when such a species awakened to its true nature, empires fell not to superior weapons but to the simple refusal to be conquered.